She betrayed her husband right in the middle of his own company's 10-year anniversary gala, while 200 of the city's elite clinked crystal flutes just one floor above us, and I will never forget the look in her eyes when she locked the cellar door. I was 24, a glorified assistant whose main job was to be invisible, standing in the shadows of the grand ballroom, holding a tray of untouched hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with expensive cologne and fake laughter, a suffocating cloud of wealth and pretense. Marcus, my boss, a man who ran his tech empire like a dictatorship, was holding court by the fountain, his arm draped possessively around a young intern who looked terrified and thrilled all at once. I saw him lean in, whispering something that made her giggle, his hand sliding too low on her waist. And then I saw Eleanor. She was standing by the French doors, watching them. She was 39, draped in a crimson silk gown that looked like a fresh wound against the marble pillars. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. Instead, her eyes hardened into something cold and terrifyingly sharp. She turned, her gaze sweeping the room until it landed on me. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of selection. She walked straight toward me, cutting through the crowd like a knife, her heels clicking a rhythmic countdown on the stone floor. She grabbed my tie, her knuckles white, and pulled me toward the service corridor without saying a word. The transition from the opulent ballroom to the service hallway was jarring. The music faded into a muffled thumping, replaced by the hum of industrial refrigerators and the scent of floor wax. Eleanor didn't stop. She dragged me past the kitchen, past the staff break room, to the heavy, reinforced oak door that led to the wine cellar. "Mrs. Sterling," I stammered, stumbling to keep up with her furious pace. "The caterers need, shut up," she hissed, her voice trembling not with sadness, but with rage. She pushed open the heavy door and shoved me into the darkness of the cellar. The air inside was instantly cooler, smelling of damp earth, old cork, and millions of dollars worth of vintage wine. It was a tomb for alcohol, silent and oppressive. She slammed the door shut and threw the heavy iron bolt, locking us in. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the confined space. We were alone, buried beneath the party, trapped in a stone box with only the dim, amber glow of the temperature control lights to see by. She turned to face me, her chest heaving. In the half-light, she looked like a vengeful spirit. "You saw him," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You saw what he did with that girl." It wasn't a question. I didn't see anything, Mrs. Sterling," I lied, the standard corporate answer programmed into me. She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, the scent of her jasmine perfume overwhelming the musty smell of the cellar. "Don't lie to me, Alex. I saw you watching. You saw the disrespect. You saw him humiliate me in my own home." She reached out, her hands gripping the lapels of my cheap suit jacket, pulling me down until our faces were inches apart. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants because he owns everything. He thinks he owns me." Her eyes were wild, burning with a fire that terrified and mesmerized me. "Well, tonight, I'm going to take something back. I'm going to take something that isn't his." The hook was set deep. This wasn't just a drunk wife looking for comfort. This was a calculated act of war against a tyrant, and I was the weapon she had chosen. The risk was suffocating. Marcus wasn't just my boss. He was a man who had blacklisted former employees for looking at him wrong. If he found us here— "Eleanor," I whispered, dropping the formal title, my heart hammering against my ribs. "If Marcus finds us—" "He won't," she interrupted, her hands moving to my tie, loosening the knot with frantic, jerky movements. "He's too busy playing king to notice the queen is missing. But we have to be quick." The rule was explicit. This was a stolen moment, a strike against the empire, and it had to happen now, in the dark, before the king remembered what he owned. But the external world wasn't done with us. Just as her hand slid under my jacket, searching for warmth, a red light blinked in the corner of the ceiling. A security camera. I froze. "The camera!" I gasped, pointing. Eleanor didn't even look up. "He turned it off," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "He turns off the cellar cameras during parties, so he can bring his guests down here without a record. He cleared the way for his own sin, and now I'm going to use it for mine." The irony was a physical weight in the room. We were safe from the digital eye, but not from the physical reality. Heavy footsteps thudded on the ceiling above us, the floor of the ballroom. Dust motes danced in the dim light, shaken loose by the vibrations. It was Marcus. I knew his heavy, distinctive tread. He was right above us, probably making his toast, celebrating his success, while his wife prepared to destroy his ego in the basement. "Make me forget him," she commanded, pressing her body against mine, forcing me back against the rough stone wall. The cold of the stone seeped through my jacket, a sharp contrast to the heat radiating from her. "Right now! Erase him!" It was a desperate plea disguised as an order. I looked at her, at the tears shimmering in her eyes, the raw need on her face, and I felt my resistance crumble. I wasn't just an assistant anymore. In this dark, cold room, I was the only person who saw her pain. I reached out, my hands trembling, and touched her waist. The silk was cool, her skin beneath it burning. But then, the handle of the cellar door rattled violently. The heavy iron bolt held, but the door shook in its frame. We froze, bodies pressed together, breaths held. A muffled voice came from the corridor. "Mrs. Sterling? Are you in there? The boss is looking for the 82 Petrus." It was the head of security. He wasn't entering, but he was knocking. He was right there. Eleanor's eyes went wide, the fear finally piercing her rage. She didn't pull away. Instead, she pressed a finger to my lips, her other hand gripping my wrist so hard her nails cut into my skin. We were trapped in a silent standoff, inches from discovery, with the most dangerous man in the city waiting for his wine upstairs. The rattling of the door handle ceased, followed by the heavy, muffled thud of footsteps retreating down the corridor, but the silence that followed was even more terrifying than the noise. We didn't exhale. Eleanor grabbed my hand, her grip slippery with cold sweat, and pulled me deeper into the cellar, away from the main entrance and into the labyrinth of towering oak shelves. We moved past the rows of Italian reds and French whites, navigating the gloom until we reached the reserve cage, a small, chain-link enclosure at the very back of the basement where Marcus kept bottles worth more than my entire life's earnings. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She reached through the mesh, her slender fingers manipulating the simple latch she clearly knew by heart, and slipped us inside. The space was barely 5 feet wide, a claustrophobic dead-end lined with dust-covered bottles of Romani Conti and Screaming Eagle. Here, the air was stagnant and freezing, a stark contrast to the feverish heat radiating from our bodies. She pushed me back against the rough, cold bricks of the foundation wall, hidden behind a crate of vintage port. We were buried alive, encased in stone and silence, the perfect, suffocating tomb for a betrayal. "He's gone to get the master key," Eleanor whispered, her voice a jagged shard of glass in the dark. "We have 5 minutes. Maybe less." She didn't pull away to formulate a plan or an alibi. Instead, she stepped into me, eliminating the final inch of space between us. The urgency of the threat didn't sober her, it intoxicated her. She was fueled by a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and vengeance. Her hands, trembling and cold, moved to the belt of my trousers, her actions frantic and clumsy. This wasn't romance. It was a desperate, physical exorcism. She wanted to use my body to scrub the memory of her husband's infidelity from her skin. I tried to grab her wrists, to slow down the madness, but she shook me off with surprising strength. "Don't stop," she breathed, burying her face in the crook of my neck, her lips hot and wet against my pulse. "If we're going to burn for this, I want to feel the fire first." The interaction that followed was a blur of shadows and sensation, a silent, violent collision of two people using each other to survive the moment. Pressed against the biting cold of the brick wall, with the smell of old dust and expensive silk filling my lungs, the boundaries of my employment and my morality dissolved. I lifted her, her legs wrapping instinctively around my waist to keep her silk shoes off the dirty floor, and the weight of her grounded me in the chaos. The friction of our bodies, the rough wool of my cheap suit against the delicate, sliding fabric of her gown, created a static charge that felt explosive. We moved with a ragged, desperate rhythm, stifling every gasp and moan into each other's shoulders, terrified that even a whisper would echo up the ventilation shafts. It was a raw, consuming act of rebellion, a theft of pleasure right under the nose of the tyrant who owned the building. Every touch was a reclamation for her, and for me, it was a terrifying freefall into a world I had only ever observed from the sidelines. But the house wasn't done with us. As the intensity peaked, the ceiling above our heads, the floor of the grand ballroom, began to vibrate. A rhythmic, heavy thumping echoed down through the timber beams, shaking the dust from the rafters. Thump, thump, thump. It was the bass of the music, or perhaps the collective footsteps of the guests, but then a singular, heavier sound dragged across the floorboards directly above the reserve cage. It sounded like a heavy chair being moved, or the paced, deliberate walk of a large man. "Marcus!" Eleanor gasped against my mouth, her body freezing mid-motion. That's his study. It's right above us. The realization was sickening. Her husband was literally walking on top of us, separated only by a few feet of wood and plaster, while we desecrated his marriage in the dark below. The proximity of the threat turned the atmosphere from erotic to nightmarish. The vibrations rattled the bottles in the crate next to us, the glass clinking softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. In her panic, or perhaps in a final act of spite, Eleanor reached out blindly and grabbed the neck of the nearest bottle from the shelf. A 1982 Petrus, the very wine the security guard had been sent to find. She didn't open it. She held it like a weapon, her knuckles white. Then, with a look of pure malice directed at the ceiling, she deliberately smashed the neck of the bottle against the brick wall next to my head. The sound was a sharp, wet crack, not loud enough to alert the house, but violent enough to shatter the moment. Dark, priceless wine exploded over us, splashing onto my shirt and soaking the front of her red dress, looking for all the world like arterial blood in the dim light. The scent of aged grapes and alcohol instantly saturated the small cage. She dropped the jagged remains of the bottle, but she kept the cork, which had popped out, still attached to a shard of glass. She clutched it in her fist, the sharp glass digging into her palm, a physical totem of the destruction she had just wrought. He loves this wine more than he ever loved me, she whispered, looking at the stain spreading on my chest. Now you wear it. Now you're part of the ruin. We were breathing heavily, covered in wine and sweat, on the precipice of total collapse, when the metal groan of the main cellar door hinges echoed through the basement. A beam of harsh, white light sliced through the darkness of the main aisle, swinging wildly across the rows of shelves. Heavy boots hit the stone floor. Mrs. Sterling? The voice was closer this time, accompanied by the jingle of a large key ring. It wasn't just the guard. The heavy, labored breathing behind him suggested Marcus had come down himself. We were cornered in the cage, trapped like animals. We had to stop. We untangled ourselves frantically, the intimacy shattered by the brute force of reality. Eleanor pushed me back into the deepest shadow of the alcove, behind the wine crates, and stepped in front of me, shielding me with her body and her ruined dress. She turned her head to me, her face and profile illuminated by the approaching flashlight beam that danced on the ceiling. The cork with the glass shard was still clenched in her hand, blood mixing with the wine on her palm. The laundry chute, she hissed, her voice barely audible, pointing to a small, square wooden hatch in the wall behind the reserve rack, used decades ago for servants. It drops into the sub-basement laundry room. It's tight, but you'll fit. She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrifyingly alive. Go! Now! Wait for me in the staff parking lot, row C, behind the dumpsters. Midnight. Do not leave without me. She leaned in and kissed me one last time, a taste of iron, wine, and fear, before turning to face the light, preparing to offer herself as the distraction to buy me my life. The wooden laundry chute was a suffocating, splintered throat that swallowed me whole, plunging me into a terrifying freefall of darkness and dust. I tumbled down the narrow shaft, my shoulders scraping against the rough timber, the smell of ancient cedar and mildew choking me, until I was violently ejected into a heavy canvas cart filled with soiled linens in the sub-basement. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I lay there for a moment in the heap of tablecloths and napkins, gasping for air, the red wine stain on my shirt stiffening in the cold air like a mock wound. The sub-basement was a stark contrast to the opulence above. It was a concrete labyrinth of humming boilers, fluorescent lights, and the roar of industrial washing machines. I scrambled out of the cart, my heart hammering against my ribs, expecting security guards to be waiting with handcuffs. But the room was empty, save for the rhythmic chugging of the machines. I was alive, but I was now a fugitive in the very building where I was employed. Above me, I could imagine the scene in the cellar, Eleanor facing down her husband and the guards, using her own humiliation as a shield to buy me time. The guilt was a physical weight, heavier than the wine-soaked suit jacket I stripped off and stuffed into the bottom of a trash bin. I was exposed, marked by the stain of our transgression, and I had to navigate the gauntlet of the service exit without being seen. I moved through the steam-filled corridors toward the loading dock, keeping to the shadows, my senses dialed up to a painful frequency. Every distant clang of a metal door sounded like a cell slamming shut. I reached the final hallway leading to the staff exit, but just as I turned the corner, the midpoint strike hit. The service elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open with a cheerful ding, and two uniformed security officers stepped out, laughing about a guest who had passed out in the garden. They were 10 feet away, blocking my only path to the parking lot. There was nowhere to hide. The hallway was a straight, white tunnel. I froze, pressing myself flat into a shallow alcove housing a fire extinguisher, holding my breath until my lungs burned. One of the guards stopped, sniffing the air. "You smell that?" he asked, frowning. "Smells like spilled wine. Vintage." He took a step toward my alcove, his hand resting on his belt. I prepared to run, to fight, to do something desperate that would end my life as I knew it. But his radio crackled to life. A call about a disturbance in the main ballroom. "Let's go!" The other guard grunted, and they jogged past my hiding spot, their boots thudding inches from my shoes. The relief was nauseating. I waited until the stairwell door clicked shut behind them before sprinting for the exit, bursting out into the cool, damp night air. The staff parking lot was a desolate expanse of wet asphalt located behind the kitchens, illuminated by a single, flickering sodium street lamp. It was midnight. The gala was winding down. Valets were rushing to retrieve Bentleys and Ferraris for the guests out front, but back here, it was silent. I found row C and crouched behind a rusted dumpster, shivering in my shirt sleeves. This was the moment of the choice. I could walk away right now. My car was parked 2 rows over. I could get in, drive home, pack a bag, and disappear. I could claim I got sick and left early. I could save myself from the inevitable fallout of Marcus's wrath. But the image of Eleanor standing in the beam of the flashlight, wine dripping from her dress like blood, rooted me to the spot. I couldn't leave her. I had tasted the ash of her life and the fire of her rebellion, and I was addicted. I chose the risk. I chose to stay in the cold, smelling of garbage and expensive wine, waiting for a woman who might never come. 20 minutes stretched into an eternity before the heavy steel door of the kitchen service entrance creaked open. Eleanor slipped out. She looked devastatingly broken. She had thrown a waiter's oversized trench coat over her ruined gown, but her hair was wild, and her makeup was smeared. She scanned the lot with frantic eyes until she saw me rise from the shadows. She didn't run. She walked toward me with a slow, uneven gait, as if the adrenaline had finally abandoned her. When she reached me, she didn't say a word. She just reached out and touched the wine stain on my chest, her fingers trembling. "You stayed," she whispered, her voice cracking. It was a confession more powerful than any declaration of love. It was an admission that she hadn't expected me to. That she was used to being abandoned, used to being the collateral damage in everyone else's story. She looked up at me, her eyes dark pools of trauma and relief. "I told him I dropped the bottle," she said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "I told him I was drunk and clumsy and trying to find something special for his toast. He believed me because it's easier to believe his wife is a screw-up than to believe she hates him." She stepped closer, invading my space again, but this time the aggression was gone, replaced by a desperate need for contact. She took my hand and turned it palm up. "I kept this," she murmured. She opened her fist, revealing the cork from the bottle of Petrus, the shard of glass still embedded in it, now stained with her own blood from where she had clenched it too tight. "In the cellar, this was a weapon," she said, pressing it into my palm and closing my fingers over the sharp edges. Now it's the truth. It's the only thing that's real." The symbol had shifted entirely. It was no longer just debris from a destroyed vintage. It was a blood oath, a jagged token of the pact we had forged in the dark. It represented the destruction of her old life and the pain she was willing to endure to escape it. I squeezed the cork, feeling the glass bite into my skin, accepting the pain as part of the deal. "We can't go back in there," I said, my voice rough. "And you can't go home with him." "I know," Eleanor replied, her gaze hardening. She reached into the deep pocket of the trench coat and pulled out a sleek, black key card with a gold logo I didn't recognize. "He thinks I'm going to the guest cottage to clean up. But I'm not." She pressed the card into my hand, her fingers lingering on my wrist, feeling my pulse one last time. "The Hotel Vernay, room 819, she commanded, the steel returning to her voice. "It's a corporate suite under a shell company name. He doesn't know about it. Go there. Wait for me. I have to make one appearance to allay suspicion, and then I'm leaving him. Tonight." She leaned in, brushing her lips against my jaw, a ghost of a kiss that promised everything and nothing. "If I'm not there in an hour, Alex, destroy the key and forget my name." She turned and walked back toward the kitchen door, leaving me alone in the dark with a jagged cork, a stolen key card, and a terror that felt indistinguishable from hope. The taxi ride to the Hotel Vernay felt less like an escape and more like a funeral procession for the life I used to know. The adrenaline that had fueled my sprint through the parking lot was rapidly curdling into a cold, heavy dread. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket, notifications from the real world trying to claw me back. It was my roommate, asking where I was, followed by a text from my mother wishing me luck at the gala. Seeing her name on the screen, innocent and unaware that her son was currently aiding a fugitive in a corporate war, broke something inside me. This was the sacrifice. I couldn't drag them into the blast radius of Marcus's wrath. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled the SIM card out of the tray, my fingers numb and clumsy, and snapped the delicate chip in half. I rolled down the window and tossed the pieces onto the wet asphalt of the highway. With that single motion, I erased Alex, the dutiful son and ambitious assistant, leaving only the accomplice sitting in the dark of the cab. I had severed the tether to my safety net. There was no going back to the apartment, no going back to the job. I was all in. Room 819 was a study in sterile, corporate luxury, cream carpets, abstract art, and a panoramic view of the city that looked cold and indifferent. I didn't turn on the lights. I paced the room in the dark, the wine stain on my chest itching like a burn, listening to the silence ringing in my ears. 40 minutes passed. Then 50. The doubt began to creep in, a poisonous whisper telling me she had played me, that she had gone back to the mansion to smooth things over with Marcus and leave me to take the fall. But then, a soft, tentative knock echoed from the heavy door. I opened it, and Eleanor slipped inside like a shadow. She had shed the oversized trench coat, revealing the ruined red gown beneath. She looked exhausted, her posture stripped of its usual regal armor, but her eyes were burning with a terrifying clarity. She locked the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a long moment, simply breathing the air of a room that Marcus didn't own. "He suspects," she whispered, opening her eyes to look at me. "He doesn't know who yet, but he knows I didn't go to the cottage. He's tearing the house apart." She pushed off the door and walked past me, not to the bed, but to the window. She stared out at the skyline, her arms wrapped around herself. "Do you know why I stayed, Alex?" she asked, her voice devoid of the earlier seduction, replaced by a raw, aching honesty. "It wasn't for the money. Everyone thinks it's the money. It was the fear." She turned to face me, the city lights haloing her silhouette. "Marcus has a file. A digital dossier on everyone he knows, including me. He has evidence of my father's gambling debts, things that could put my family in prison. He bought my obedience with their safety. I've been a hostage in that mansion for 10 years, smiling for cameras, hosting his parties, and sleeping in a bed that felt like a coffin." She walked over to me, reaching out to touch the lapel of my shirt, her fingers tracing the edge of the wine stain. "Tonight, in the cellar, that was the first time in a decade I felt like I owned my own body. You didn't just help me cheat, you helped me breathe." The intimacy of her confession was heavier than any physical touch. She was stripping herself bare, revealing the ugly, jagged machinery of her marriage. I wasn't just a fling. I was the first breath of air she'd had in years. I covered her hand with mine, pressing it against my chest. "We're out," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my gut. "You're here. We can figure this out." But the sanctuary was an illusion. A sharp ping from her clutch on the table shattered the moment. It was the burner phone she kept for the shell company account. She picked it up, and I saw the blood drain from her face, leaving her ghostly pale. She held the screen up for me to see. It wasn't a text from a lawyer or a bank. It was a security alert from the mansion's internal network, a system she still had mirrored access to. The notification read, "Security breach. Wine cellar audio log retrieved. Processing voice ID." The blood froze in my veins. Marcus hadn't just looked for physical evidence. He had pulled the backup audio logs from the disabled security system. He was running a voice match. It was only a matter of time, minutes, maybe hours, before his software matched my voice from the cellar to the employee database. The external danger had transitioned from a vague threat to a digital crosshair painted on my forehead. "He knows," Eleanor gasped, dropping the phone as if it were red hot. "Or he will know very soon. He'll send his private security. They won't call the police, Alex. They'll just make us disappear." The panic was rising in her throat, choking her. "You have to go. You have to run. If you leave now, you might make it out of the city before the ID matches." "I'm not leaving you," I said, the refusal instantaneous and absolute. "He has leverage on you. If I run, he wins. He keeps you. He'll kill you, she cried, grabbing my shoulders. Then we take away his leverage, I countered, gripping her arms. The file. The dossier on your father. Where is it? Eleanor stared at me, stunned by the question. It's in his private vault. At the downtown office. The penthouse level. Then we get it, I said. We steal it. Tonight. It was insanity. It was suicide. But looking at her, seeing the terror warring with hope in her eyes, I knew there was no other path. We couldn't run. We had to attack. Eleanor looked at me, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, a new determination hardened her features. She reached into her bodice and pulled out a small, silver pendant she wore on a chain, a locket I hadn't noticed before. She opened it. Inside wasn't a picture, but a tiny, high-tech induction key. This opens the private elevator, she whispered. I stole it months ago, hoping I'd be brave enough to use it. She pressed the warm metal into my hand. Meet me at the loading dock of the Sterling Tower at 3 a.m. I need to get the security codes from his laptop while he's distracted hunting us. If we do this, there is no going back. We either destroy him or we die. The decision was made. We were going back into the lion's den, bound by a terrifying pact to finish what we started in the dark. The loading dock of the Sterling Tower was a cavernous maw of concrete and shadows at 3 a.m., smelling of diesel fumes and cold city rain. I waited by the service entrance, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, clutching the silver pendant key Eleanor had given me. It felt heavy, like a grenade pin I was about to pull. When Eleanor finally emerged from the darkness of the alley, she looked transformed. The ruined red gown was gone, replaced by a sleek black jumpsuit and a leather jacket she must have had stashed. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face pale but fierce. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like a goodbye. We moved to the private elevator bank, and I swiped the pendant. The doors slid open with a whisper, and we ascended 50 floors in a silence so thick it felt like pressure building before an explosion. The penthouse office was a glass fortress floating above the city, dark save for the amber glow of the city lights below. We moved quickly to Marcus's massive desk. Eleanor's hands flew across the keyboard of his laptop, bypassing security protocols she had memorized years ago. The files are on the external server, she whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. I'm copying them to the cloud. And I'm wiping the local drive. I stood guard by the door, watching the hallway monitor. The progress bar crawled, 80%, 90%. And then, the elevator chimed. Not the service elevator, the main one. The doors opened, and Marcus stepped out. He wasn't alone. 2 of his security team flanked him. He looked disheveled, still in his tuxedo, his face a mask of cold fury. He saw us instantly. I knew it, he said, his voice deceptively calm. I knew you'd come for the leverage. He pulled a gun from his jacket, a sleek, silver pistol that looked terrifyingly real in the office light. Step away from the computer, Eleanor. Eleanor didn't move. She hit the final key. It's done, Marcus, she said, her voice steady. The files are gone. They're with the SEC, the IRS, and every news outlet in the city. You're finished. Marcus raised the gun, aiming it at her. You think I care about the money? He sneered. You destroyed my reputation. You destroyed me. He cocked the hammer. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed the heavy marble bust from the pedestal next to me and hurled it at the glass wall of the office. The impact was explosive. The floor-to-ceiling pane shattered into a million diamonds, the wind from 50 stories up roaring into the room like a jet engine. The distraction was enough. Marcus flinched, turning toward the noise. Eleanor grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the desk and swung it with all her might, smashing it against his wrist. The gun skittered across the floor. I tackled him, driving him back against the wall, while Eleanor grabbed the gun. She pointed it at him, her hand shaking, then lowered it. I won't kill you, she said, her voice trembling with adrenaline. I want you to live to see everything you built turn to ash. We fled down the fire stairs as the security guards scrambled to help Marcus. We burst out into the alleyway, gasping for air, the cold rain hitting our faces. We were free. We had won. But as we stood there, shivering in the dark, the reality of our victory settled in. We had destroyed his empire, but we had also destroyed our own lives. We were fugitives now, bound by a crime and a secret that would hunt us forever. Eleanor turned to me. She reached out, her hand touching my cheek, her thumb brushing away a smear of dirt. "You have to go," she said, her voice soft. "I have a plane waiting at a private airfield. I can disappear. But you have a life here. If you come with me, you'll be running forever." "I don't care," I said, grabbing her hand. "I want to be with you." "I know," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "But I love you too much to let you become a ghost like me." She kissed me, hard, desperate, a kiss that tasted of rain and freedom and heartbreak. Then she pulled away. "The car is around the corner. Go. Don't look back." I watched her walk away, a silhouette dissolving into the shadows of the city she had just conquered. I stood there until the sound of her footsteps faded, leaving me alone in the rain with nothing but the memory of her touch and the knowledge that I had helped a queen reclaim her throne. 1 month later. The scandal was the biggest in the city's history. Marcus was in federal custody, his empire in ruins. Eleanor was gone, a phantom who had vanished into the ether. I had moved to a small coastal town, starting over under a new name, working a quiet job in a bookstore. I hadn't heard a word. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a package arrived at the store. It was wrapped in brown paper, no return address. I opened it. Inside was a bottle of wine, a 1982 Petrus, the same vintage we had destroyed in the cellar. But this bottle was full, pristine. Tucked under the bottle was a note on heavy cream cardstock. It wasn't a love letter. It was an invitation. I picked up the note, reading the familiar, elegant script. "The vintage is better when shared. Come find me in Amalfi. The door is unlocked." I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift from my shoulders. I put the note in my pocket, grabbed the bottle, and walked out of the store, into the bright, blinding sunlight, ready to follow the map she had left me.